Since April 2021, Constructive Voices has been engaging an audience across the construction industry through our podcasts. With at least 2 episodes every month, the podcast has attracted industry thought leaders on key topics including sustainability, technology, people, and places. We talk about climate change, mental health, building technologies and materials, talent acquisition and development, diversity and inclusion, design techniques and trends, and much more. And now, the conversation's building. Constructive Voices is becoming a radio station, available worldwide online, providing a new platform for the construction industry to share best practice, new developments, the answers to the big questions, solutions to growing challenges. 24 hours a day, we'll share insightful, inspiring and innovative views from the best in the business, with even more voices and more topics more often. Constructive Voices Radio also enables trusted contributors to connect with our growing audience through branded content alongside our editorial features. Professionally produced Constructive Voices audio content gives your brand a new way to tell your story, share your insights, and engage with the industry. Constructive Voices Radio will be a compelling mix of in-depth interviews, industry news segments, coverage of events, and the opportunity for industry professionals around the world to add their experience and views. Constructive Voices, the conversation's building. And here's just a taste of what we're all about.
This is Constructive Voices.
Henry McDonald is a regular voice on the Constructive Voices podcast. He's no stranger to chatting with some of the industry's innovators. And today, Henry is talking with Victoria Kate Burrows, Advancing Net Zero Director at the World Green Building Council. Victoria oversees the pioneering global project to ensure that all buildings are net zero carbon by 2050.
Good morning, Victoria.
Hi, Henry. Good morning.
The first thing I wanted to ask you was, how do you define a building that is net zero?
Well, that's a great and very important question to start with. A huge amount of our work is helping to unpick what those definitions mean for different organizations, different people, different parts of the sector. But we ultimately have to get to complete decarbonisation by 2050. That's our goal, is for the sector, all buildings not to use any emissions at all, not to use any fossil fuels, to be completely energy efficient and comfortable and healthy and resilient and equitable as a sector. That is a huge challenge and something that cannot happen overnight. So for us, net zero is part of the journey. That formula of being completely emission-free from the building and construction sector is simply not feasible in every type of building and every type of country. In fact, some regulations prevent and limit the amount of renewable energy you can generate on site. So there's real barriers in the way. So for us, net zero is part of that journey. It means maximizing the reductions in terms of energy consumption, emissions, and also material consumption and resource use, as we've heard, extremely important. And then whatever you can't reduce, whatever those residual emissions are, that there's options there for you to either procure renewable energy from outside of your site or offset those remaining emissions. And that's the net part of the equation. And we do see that process, that offsets are a really important and fundamental part of that transition to help us also achieve wider social and environmental change.
Constructive Voices.
What practical missions can the robot carry out on building sites, construction areas, factories, and other workplaces?
I think certainly for us, and I understand what Boston have in mind, and I understand what Trimble have in mind, and I think what we sort of went, actually, in theory, it can undertake any surveying, monitoring or capture activity on any site. There are certain limitations and restrictions. You could say doors, but actually Spot comes with a manipulator arm, and depending on what the payload you put on. So we've been working predominantly with the scanning payload. So we've been using the Trimble X7 workflow in doing reality capture. So we're doing high survey grade capture on a repetitive and scalable basis, so that we deploy it in. Traditionally, you'd pay for somebody to come in and scan your project once, maybe at the start, maybe at the end, or you do it periodically every other month or whatever. It's an expensive cost. It's not something that's normally budgeted for. With Spot, our immediate was, well, actually, we could do this every hour, we could do this every day, we could do this every week, and we get a much clearer and proactive picture of our project, and the accuracies are there. And we can do a lot of that without mobilization costs. In theory, I don't need to get anybody out of bed to do it. We're working towards those steps of autonomy, don't get me wrong, but the biggest one for us and the real focus for us is you can put Spot in a place where you don't want to put a person and still be able to achieve the same results. So
such as, for example,
confined spaces. So, we don't like to put people in confined spaces. Wherever possible, we try and eliminate or mitigate a risk to put somebody in the confined space because of the risks, the health and safety risks of entrapment, gases, everything that can come with it. So we find a way to do it. What we currently do is we traditionally used to use a tripod, invert that tripod, stick a total station down, but you'd get a very limited view. Instead, and you can have Spot walk along a culvert. It's in a confined space. The Trimble X7 is phenomenal in low light or no light environments, and we've done some case study work in closed doors with no lighting in, and we can get a full picture of a point cloud and photogrammetry that comes out of it that tells us exactly where things are. And I've not had to put anybody at risk. It's the same at working at height. We've deployed Spot into a crumbling building. We know the roof is potentially coming in at any point. Rather than risk putting somebody in that space or a team in that space to do evaluation and survey, we've deployed Spot. He's walked through a door. Without sort of getting too extreme about it, I can put a price on Spot. Spot costs me X amount to purchase in or lease or however anybody wants to do it. What you can't put a price on is a human life. It's an expensive, don't get me wrong, it's an expensive cost, but it's a cost that is bared upon a company because we see massive returns of investment back on it as part of our working solution.
So in terms of construction, we have this problem in the business. We know this here. It could reduce the risk to human life on sites that can often be dangerous, that do have potential lethal possibilities. Yep. Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely, 100%. And it's not just the risk to life, it's the early stages of that. I think the biggest cause of injury or health and safety stats, certainly in the UK market, is all around slips, trips and falls on a construction site now. Whether that's walking over sleepers on a railway track bed, whether that's going up and down steps or scaffolding or any structure, or walking up and down a stockpile. Individuals walk up and down stockpiles to take survey measurements for volume calculations. Spot can do that same process and be giving me the results instantaneously without me having anybody going up and down and risking a slip, trip, fall occurrence, incidents all happening. We've worked with Spot going up and down scaffolding stairs. We've worked with Spot going up and down open staircases. So yeah, it works great with solid because you've got solid concrete staircase going up and down, but we've worked with the open construction style staircases that sit on the outside external face of the building. Spot gets up and down there, no problem at all, whilst also still carrying an expensive scanner at the same time. So we don't have to move Spot, then manipulate it, and we can Spot goes off on its pre-programmed walk, goes up and down the stairs, and it's capturing this data, and this data is available immediately. I'm not waiting.
This is Constructive Voices.
Professor Michael Parkinson joined us to talk to Constructive Voices' Henry MacDonald about the proposed Everton Stadium project, an important step in Liverpool's regeneration.
The river made Liverpool the richest city in the greatest empire the world had ever seen outside of London. The collapse of the docks in the 60s and 70s and 80s dragged Liverpool down. And for 30 years, Liverpool turned its back to the water, its back to the city. When the Development Corporation got going in the 80s, we started to see the role of the river and the waterfront, and encouraged by Europe, we realised it was a terrific asset. Now Everton Football Club have got these hugely ambitious plans to put one of the most sustainable, greenest stadia in one of the most challenging parts of Liverpool City and city centre, which is North Liverpool. So it is a project, which we can talk about the numbers in due course, which would transform the worst part of the waterfront. It's currently derelict and neglected. The only thing that's near the dock is actually the local sewage treatment factory. It is a part which is very close to North Liverpool, which grew up on the docks. And when the docks decline, it fell, and therefore that part of the city has the worst economic social problems of any bit of Liverpool city region. And it is physically not more than 1 mile from the regenerated city centre. So, Everton Football Club, having tried to develop a new stadium for a long time and failed, and needing to develop a stadium because it's a marvellous place, but old and too small, have got a grand project to invest in Bramley-Moore Dock to make a really high-quality building which respects heritage, which would form a huge anchor in North Liverpool, would tie that part of the city at Bramley-Moore, which is the furthest part of the old docks, back into the city centre, and would be a driver of development in that 1 mile between Bramley-Moore and frankly, the liver buildings. There's already quite a lot of development going on there because of Peel Waters, Peel Company, and there's a lot of residential stuff and some office stuff, and that's taking place. But the football stadium would be a huge economic driver. I mean, we could talk about the figures about economic impact. It would be a terrific heritage thing. It would be a great visible project which would attract tourists, and it would physically anchor and ensure that the growth of the city went back out into the parts which had failed. So huge symbolic significance, huge cultural significance, huge physical significance, and hugely exciting. And at the other end of the waterfront, that is now being developed in the south side of the city. So what Liverpool has in prospect are two major developments, one north, one south, which themselves would be hugely significant, but would fill in the rest of the river down to the city centre. This is Liverpool's new great project.
Constructive Voices.
Sustainability and green building is one of the recurring themes on the podcast, and in episode 13, we heard from two women who are leading lights when it comes to creating sustainable change within the construction industry. Emma Nicholson and Sumeli Aroafor.
Well, I've been in the industry about over 22 years, and I think that there's definitely been a rise of women in sustainability kind of careers. And I think increasingly we're going to see more women in leadership roles over the next 5 to 10 years in the future. And I've also seen groups like my own, because I set up a network platform like Women in Sustainable Construction and Property way back in 2010, 2011, which has grown. And there are other groups as well that have developed, such as mine. There's Women in BRE, there's WIBSI, which is, associated with CIBSI. There's Women in Planning. There's Women in Sustainability. So there's quite a few of these network groups that have now become very, very established. And I think more and more businesses are going to realise, as Sumeli said, the need for diversity within the organisations. We are going to see more women hopefully in leadership roles, and also getting on board with regards to the net zero journey. It's important for organisations to be on board and to be leaders rather than as followers, because otherwise they're just going to get swept along by legislation. The question is, does your business that you work for, does it want to be a leader or does it want to be a follower?
I think one thing that potentially Emma was alluding to is that there's been a rise in the number of women within the construction industry over the years. And I have to back that up. When I was studying for architecture, there were a handful of us girls on the course. By the first year, a good chunk of them dropped off the course. And so I tend to be very cautious with generalizations because it then places a silent burden on a certain group to effect change. I think a lot of times a passion for sustainability tends to be driven by a desire to improve the fidelity of the Earth's environments and resources. Sometimes people are naturally sensitized to touch the Earth lightly. Other people couldn't care less, haven't thought about it. Not because they don't care, it's just not something that, taps their minds in any way. But some people are just really, really very keen to leave a livable world for the coming generation. Sometimes because women bear children, there's an extrapolation that they care more about the earth, and then they want to leave a legacy. But children are crafted by fathers and mothers, men and women, and I feel like the job of preserving the world is for everyone. There just needs to be even more room on the table. The decision makers, the leadership, just like Emma was talking about, there needs to be more room for women at those levels of authority, because you only understand your lived experience. As a man, you will understand your lived experience, or you will extrapolate based on a wife or a mother or a sister. It's what you observe that you will know. And so I think that for us to collectively contribute all of our ideas, all of our innate natural knowledge and ways of thinking, everyone needs to come on the table and do that work. And space needs to be made for women to contribute to that conversation and to move that forward.